Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Well, M Plus has had so many problems, as we all know, and Blizzard has actually been making some changes with the Gilded Crest reward system, and they've been sending out some surveys to get some ideas for what they might want to be changing in the long term. And a lot of content creators, myself included, have been putting out our ideas for what to do about the long term, the great big picture about Mythic Plus. We'll talk about that in a sec, but what I really want to talk about for the most of the time today is what they can be doing in the here and now for Season 2. Some of the great big picture stuff I love is having a solo queue system from like the +2s to the +9s to kind of teach people how dungeons are going to be working, having 10s and up be the progression environment, making it so keys don't deplete past like 12s, maybe 10s, something along those lines, so that you can actually progress through keystones and you're actually incentivized to kind of sit there and work your way through it if you're struggling. Blizzard's changes to the Gilded Crest rewards and the crest rewards in general for depleting keys has also gotten even better, actually rewarding you for completing dungeons and seeing them out through to the end. Those things are fantastic, but in a lot of cases, I feel like we're missing what should be happening specifically with the dungeons. I think Bellular made some great points in his video about how he wants to like align incentives and have that be like driving the correct behavior and everything like that. And he talks quite a lot in his videos about how you can like get around problems and not try to like solve the instantaneous little thing. That being said, I think that there's actually a lot of room for the encounter designers at Blizzard to actually make some really subtle changes that could have a wide-reaching impact. It's no surprise that if you've been playing Mythic Plus for a long time, that the dungeons keep on getting harder, and most of the time that's coming in with trash mobs. Trash requiring more CCs, kicks, crowd controls, stuns. It adds on to this huge list that Bellular highlighted in one of his videos in the laundry list of responsibilities that's happening for the team. It's no surprise that we have Prot Pally, or in last expansion, Vengeance Demon Hunter being insanely dominant for the tanks because they're bringing the most amount of passive crowd control for the table, for the team, making it easier on everybody else. While Enhanced Shaman does stupid amounts of damage, it also brings around all this crowd control, short kick, all those utility sides. I really think what Mythic Plus needs going into Season 2 is actually having a trend reversal for a lot of their trash design and counter design in general to make sure that there's not nearly as much stress onto the entirety of the group, and they can do it in a way that's sort of driving the incentives for what people are already really enjoying. Healers, as an example, love keeping their allies safe and having an environment that they can actually have an impact, have agency to keep everybody alive. They're the ones who want to keep you safe in game, and our sponsor for today's video, Surfshark VPN, are the ones who want to keep you safe online. Their VPN service is there to protect your information when you're traveling for the holidays, whether it's airport Wi-Fi or any unsecured Wi-Fi that you may have as you're traveling back to see family. Their service covers unlimited devices, and they have access to 3,200 servers in over 100 countries. They're a great service that I've taken advantage of myself whenever I've had to travel for Race to World First. They also have services beyond just a VPN with their antivirus services and with Incogni, so you can reclaim your information from those data collectors as well. So there's never been a better time to give it a shot with their 30-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 customer service. So make sure to check our link in the description of surfshark.com/jackdeal for 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN. Huge thank you to them for sponsoring this video, and let's continue. We already are seeing Blizzard trying to find some fixes and trying to find some way that they can make big changes to Mythic Plus with the recent survey that Wowhead just reported on, where they're trying to see if they want to have players have deaths instead of timers be the sort of like gate to chesting Mythic Plus dungeons. The downside to that is that the game starts slowing down a crazy amount, so you're waiting for all of your cooldowns before every single trash pack, taking a much longer time to complete the dungeons. There's this sort of issue where you want to farm higher crests or farm more crests and a greater amount of time on like an alt, and then you're just trying to make sure you play safely so you don't just completely brick it. A lot of things like that, which would be weird. Also, they'd have to make some kind of change to the crest depletion system. Otherwise, you just run in, die a whole bunch with the new crest change, and then you just get rewarded with crests. So not really sure what they're going for there, but I really believe that at least from this evidence that we've seen, they're kind of focusing on the wrong behaviors and the wrong sort of incentives to give to people. Because at the end of the day, yeah, player progression has been this huge point that they want to make sure they're properly incentivizing. So they're like, hey, go do harder content, you get better gear. At the end of the day, though, you also want to make sure people are having fun with Mythic Plus. Raiding, as an example, has gotten harder than ever, and I notice it so much in my raid where we can't really banter that much anymore, and that's a whole other topic, right? But it's so difficult to like banter in harder content because there's so much stuff happening. And from like a rating perspective, that's mechanics, that's boss mechanics. From an M plus perspective, most of the time it's just trash pulls. The time we actually get to talk or banter in dungeons is oftentimes on like some of the easier boss fights. Usually like half of the boss fights in each of the dungeons are like pretty face roll easy. The first boss of Dawnbreaker, for example, you just can be yapping to your team the entire time. What really happens is it's the trash pulls, which require the crowd control, the coordination. It requires so much of your overall kit knowledge and coordination to execute at a high level, whether you are talking to your buddies in voice chat or you are pugging with no voice whatsoever. And that really leads me to my biggest point, is that there's three main areas that you need to learn about in World of Warcraft to be successful. You need to do really high output, which is usually people's most fun thing. They want to do big damage. They want to do big healing. Then there is using your defensives, which we know most people don't like. And then there's using crowd control, which also most people don't really like. So why then, just because we're getting more crowd control abilities and more resources, why then is it such a huge emphasis in overall dungeon design? And before you answer that, I do think that there's some examples of dungeons in Season 1 right now, which are actually not insanely punishing for trash mobs whatsoever. I think they're Dawnbreaker and, in some areas, Stonevault. Both of these dungeons, from a kick perspective, have a lot of areas where letting the bolt cast go off is not going to be leading to this instantaneous death from 1,000 cuts away. You might have it in like a Grim Batol or something along those lines. Or you're not having casted abilities which put negative heal absorbs on you that you can't possibly heal off, so you just have to have a dispel for it, right? They produce a large amount of unavoidable damage, especially in Dawnbreaker, with even like the ghosts that you'll see all around the cathedral, where they put out a dot on a player, they spew some goo on the ground, which is like quintessential World of Warcraft mechanic, just dodge stuff on the ground, and then they do big AoE afterwards. They deal huge amounts of unavoidable damage that everyone has to play around, that is easy to learn, easy to figure out. And when you fight enough of those mobs that have minimal amounts of casts and stops, some of them are immune to crowd control, some of them are not. Some of them you just delay some of the casts going out. In Stonevault, you have these alloy bolts that are casting like crazy, but they deal such moderate amounts of damage that you'd have to get like triple targeted in order to get killed from them. And so it's healable amounts of damage, and you're actually able to get some benefit with crowd control, but not feel shackled to it or not feel required to do it. Having more trash mobs like this, and not trash mobs that have these one-shot level bolts or random silences for no reason, something like that, that is present in Stonevault, would go really, really far in actually helping out the player base in a variety of ways. Tank design is something that people are always going to be talking about, which is why it's a massive head scratcher that there's so many tank busters in dungeons that specifically can be immuned or stacks reset. Having those mechanics getting removed while still actually having some tank challenge in something like the Despoiler in Stonevault, which will have a tank buster and then it has a huge AoE of damage that you know is coming, that you know you have to heal through or defensive through. Those are the kind of mechanics, if they started shifting Mythic Plus to be more about, would then be having some of the focus and even the incentive for player base to be, hey, this is about the damage that's going out, the damage that I'm doing, or the damage that I'm healing up, which is most people's favorite thing about doing dungeon content, is the big pulls, while still having a punishment for overpulling. Since there is a larger amount of unavoidable damage going out on the group, you are still going to be restrained by the power of using your defensives, some benefit for crowd control, without having massive penalties for not having perfect, flawless crowd control. Dungeons have really just only gotten harder since Mythic Plus was introduced. If you played back in Legion, for example, what happened with a lot of mobs that would just randomly like throw discs or throw rocks like in Neltharian's Lair is it'd actually be like zombie mobs. You would, as a tank, pull all these mobs together and then run away from them and set a whole bunch of slows for them, and then they would just do no mechanics until they reached the tank once again. So the goal was for the tank to just infinitely kite and then wait for them to just get killed by the rest of the DPS crew. They steadily kept making dungeons harder, they steadily kept making trash especially harder, and you saw it a lot in Shadowlands dungeons, which we're seeing return back once again here in the first season of The War Within, where you would have a lot of avoidable damage if you were crowd controlling. And I remember how they really killed a lot of heal checks in early Shadowlands dungeons, to the point that what happened was low level keys, you were just having to heal through all the bolt casts going off, and then higher level keys, you were just a fourth DPS. Now, people in higher level keys, whether they were a healer or a DPS or a tank, never loved having to deal with all this crowd control, but that was what was required for you to get higher into dungeons. And it still probably will be for those super high-end pushers. But when dungeons themselves don't really do a great job of teaching you how to overcome some of these challenges, it's especially punishing, even if they actually produce a solo queue from like the +2s to the +9s. I would love it. But even if they don't have that, the dungeons themselves still need to not be so punishing on trash mechanics, because that's most of the failure point that's coming in for a lot of these groups, is not being able to coordinate all of these things together and not doing it nearly as well as high-end groups who are able to start steamrolling it, creating a wider variety of experiences for people than ever before. They'll watch a streamer or watch content creator who's doing these massive pulls and these big dungeons, and then they don't have the agency to go do those things themselves, because you get stonewalled by a point where you're just hoping that the people in LFG with whatever eye level or IO score they have know how to use those abilities. And a lot of times you can just brute force your way and play enough hours that eventually you'll get your score and eventually you'll get your IO. And you don't really know if the next person that is in the group with you is also knowledgeable of what's happening or is playing a lot as a result, creating a really wide spread in the skill gap for things, and honestly in a way that's not super engaging for people anyway. Nobody really brags about how many kicks, stuns, interrupts, crowd controls they get to do at the dungeons unless somebody's calling them out and they're trying to make a point about it. What people have often been preferring in something like WoW is focusing on the output, focusing on how they can do big dam, big healing, big pulls all the time for fun. And trash as a result has just gotten more complex to start bogging it down, even while they design some dungeons like Dawnbreaker to specifically have lots of mini bosses, lots of unavoidable damage that they are continuously tuning and scaling and adjusting, especially in beta in the early month or so of the season, to make sure it didn't get out of hand. And what results is probably my favorite dungeon of the season, minus the flying, because you actually have consistent things to heal, consistent challenges in terms of what needs to be healed, and there's not a massive penalty for not having enough crowd control, not having enough kicks in too many of the areas. Most of the time, there's like one mage in a pull, and you just got to kick their one bolt or stun it or crowd control it, and you don't have to worry about the negative effects of that direct kick change they made in The War Within beta, where you had to kick the volley, you had to specifically interrupt this cast, otherwise it would just recast again. I believe the encounter designers who are currently making and tuning and adjusting the Season 2 dungeons have a lot more leeway to make these kind of changes to trash mobs than, say, the lead designers for making massive changes to a solo queue system, for example, and reorganizing all of their incentives around the entire M+ experience. I'd imagine the encounter designers out there can do a lot to actually design trash to be requiring less in the mindset of crowd control and high-end coordination, and much more in just doing lots of damage, doing lots of healing in order to kill off a priority mini-boss or a priority elite mob that's always doing the same things, and it's not having a wide-reaching variance depending on the skill of your interrupts and crowd control for your team. I really hope that they make some of those good changes coming up, because we've already seen large amounts of changes to Cataclysm dungeons, Shadowlands dungeons, and how to make them a little more challenging here and there, and I've not been loving the products of what we got. You can even use the maze in Mist of Scythe as an example of things that just make it more annoying and not really so much of like an extra challenge or extra level of interest for the rest of the team. But let me know what you guys think and what other changes you think could realistically happen very soon for something in Season 2. Thank you so much to our patrons for all they do in making this content happen, and big thanks to our sponsor of this video, Surfshark VPN. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope y'all enjoyed it, and I'll catch y'all next time.